Thank you for coming out to the overview of the airport environmental assessment that we're doing for the master plan projects. My name is Katie Service. I'm the airport manager. Again, welcome. This is the first public meeting that we have this evening for the Cape Cod Gateway Airport environmental review of improvement projects that were highlighted and identified during our airport master plan process. In a few moments, you will meet the team and our partners that will be working with us and with you, our stakeholders, to analyze and review the potential environmental impacts that any of these proposed projects may have. As you can see in the next slide from the agenda, these are the topics that we'll be discussing this evening. Many of you that are in this room were involved in the airport master plan process, but the intent of tonight's meeting and the environmental assessment going forward will be to provide you with an overview and time to comment on the proposed projects for the airport. We tonight want to identify how you as our community and stakeholders can be involved in the overall process. We will identify how you can provide comments, so that will be identified this evening, where the technical data will sit and how it will be accessible for you to download information that's associated with the overall program, and when public meetings will take place and how you can get involved. So I will turn this over to right now to Erin Reed. She was with Howard Stein Hudson, and she will go over a few elements for tonight's meeting. Erin?
Thanks, Katie. Perfect. So tonight we're just going to be covering the topics listed in the agenda. It's not on here. We do have a Portuguese interpreter if there's anyone that needs interpretation. We have headsets. You can see my colleague Cindy. We've got it on Zoom. So if you do need interpretation, unfortunately we've got a bit of an audio issue, so we're going to have you type in your question in the chat so we can have two-way communication. So we're going to get through the whole presentation, and then we're going to get through questions and answers. So we want you to just please state your name and your relationship to the project before your question. We've got a good number of people here tonight, so we're going to ask one question at a time, and then we'll go back for second questions. And all questions and comments are welcome. But we just request that you refrain from any disrespectful comments, and thank you all for coming this evening.
I'm just going to take a moment to make sure that the folks that are on Zoom can see the presentation that we have. Okay.
Thank you, Katie. Good evening. My name is Alyssa Jacobs. I am with Epsilon Associates. We are the environmental consultants that are working with the airport for the environmental assessment of the master plan project. So I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to the airport team as well as the consultant team that'll be working essentially over the almost next 2 years, working our way through the regulatory process. So you have your Cape Cod Gateway Airport leadership. You've met the wonderful Katie Service, who serves as airport manager. Matt Elia is the assistant airport manager. He is trying to hide in the back of the room. And then you have a commission, which is your representatives of the town that serve the airport. Katie, is any of the commission members here this evening?
We do have Joe DeGeorge is one of our commissioners that's here. Thank you, Joe, for being here.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so this is the project team that we've assembled for this process. Again, I'm with Epsilon Associates. Epsilon is serving as the lead environmental consultant for the project. And we'll be responsible for coordinating with all of our other consultants in the airport and pulling all of this technical information into the documents that the regulatory agencies require. Airport Solutions Group, or ASG. ASG is serving as the airport planner and engineer for this project. Bob Mallard is here from ASG. He's been working on this airport for a while now and is quite familiar with it. You've met Erin Reed with Howard Stein Hudson. Howard Stein Hudson will be leading the public involvement process. So this is the first of several public outreach meetings that we'll be holding, in addition to the required public meetings associated with the different review processes that the agencies require. So we want to make sure that we're getting input from you, the stakeholders, and the users of the airport.
Can I interrupt you for one moment? I'm sorry. A little course of action here. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we are recording this tonight, this evening, through the town of Barnstable. We're also recording this on Zoom, and just wanted to make sure if anybody else is recording it, please let us know now. But we are recording it. We will be posting this on our website for anyone to take a look at it afterwards. Just wanted to make sure that was covered. And if you could talk a little bit closer to that.
Sure. Howard Stein Hudson will also be assisting with any transportation analysis necessary, transportation of the wheeled variety on the ground. And finally, to round out our team, we have GEI and Commonwealth Heritage Group. Commonwealth Heritage Group is providing their expertise on cultural resources and historic preservation issues, and GEI is providing environmental and geotechnical engineering services. So we wanted to pull together the best of the best to serve the airport as we go through this process. A little bit of airport background for you. The airport was created in the 1930s, and like many other airports, municipal airports around the state, it was used by the U.S. Navy during World War II for training and other exercises. It was conveyed to the town of Barnstable in 1948 for use as a public airport. The airport manages 639 acres, 140 of which are paved for runways, taxiways, aprons, parking lots, rooftops, and roads. And it's operated as part of the enterprise fund for the town of Barnstable. Yep, wrong click. A little bit about the airport background today. It has commercial, charter, corporate, and general aviation users. It's home to over 65 businesses and private users. And commercial air traffic comes from Cape Air, JetBlue, and Atlantic Aviation. Assets of the airport include this beautiful 35,000 square foot passenger terminal, the 85-foot air traffic control tower, extensive parking facilities, newly constructed aircraft ramps, taxiways, an airport rescue firefighting team, maintenance building, an aircraft fuel farm, as well as 40-plus private tenants who lease hangar space. The economic impact of the airport on the local area is pretty big. These numbers are coming from the 2019 State Airport Economic Analysis. And the airport provides employment for 1,724 people with an annual payroll in excess of $73.8 million. It has a regional economic output in excess of $150 million. It has 24 airport employees that work directly for the airport. These are the commercial aircraft air services that currently are based and provide regional air transportation for users of the airport. I'm going to give a brief overview and background of the airport master plan that was approved in 2022. And then I'm going to get into some of the environmental review processes that are required as the next step of this process. Got ahead of myself in my notes here. Okay. So the master plan was approved earlier this year. It was a multi-year process that was undertaken by the airport and the airport planners, McFarland and Johnson. The airport master plan, it's required by the FAA in order to plan for the future. and highlight airport projects needed to meet demand, including rehabilitation of existing infrastructure. The master plan not only considers the needs of aviation over the next 20 years, but also considers the needs of Cape Cod, the local region, and the economy. So what I have up here is a figure detailing all the components of the 20-year master plan. These will not all be constructed tomorrow. These will be constructed as funding allows through the capital improvement plan process. So just to orient you a little bit to where we're sitting, we are over here in the terminal, and then hopefully you all can see the mouse. And route north is to the top of the screen. So what's highlighted in, I guess we'll call it pink, are portions of existing taxiways that will be removed. So this is pavement that is going to be removed as taxiways are relocated and realigned to be current with FAA standards. The yellow is new pavement. So for example, taxiway Bravo or taxiway B will be removed and shifted closer to the runway, still in compliance with FAA standards. So that's why you're seeing this new yellow here. And some of these small, shorter stub taxiways will be removed as well. The yellow here and here, these are hangar and ramp development areas. These are areas where potential new hangars could be constructed and new aircraft could be parked. And then finally, we have an EMAS at the end. Bob, you'll have to always help me with this acronym, Engineered Materials Arrest System?
Yes.
Wow, yes. And so there's currently an EMAS system at the 6th end of runway 624, and the master plan proposes constructing a second one at the 24 end. I should note there's the two runways are labeled. This is the 624 runway with the 6 approach end here, 24 over here, and it's 150 feet wide. And the other runway is the 1533 runway, also 150 feet wide. The airport master plan also proposes a balanced extension to this runway with an extension of 800 feet at the, sorry, don't need my 1-5 ends, thank you, Katie, and an extension of approximately 400 feet at the 3-3 end. Finally, what else is showing on this map are some terminal improvements as well as some electric aircraft charging stations. The hashed markings in aqua at each runway end demarcate the runway protection zone of the airport that the airport currently does not have control over. So these represent navigation easements that would be acquired as willing sellers would allow, so that the airport can ensure the safe approach to the 4 runway ends. So now we're going to test my technological ability here. So this is a Google Earth video, just to kind of navigate you through the different master plan projects, and I'll try to narrate it. So again, we're sitting in the terminal building over here. Route 6 is to the north. The white is the outline of the airport property. All right, so I'm zooming in on the airport. So we're going to look at what's existing conditions first. Existing is outlined in the light black. We also have the ramp development areas, the pavement removal areas, the new taxiway and the runway extension, the EMAS at the 2-4 end, and then finally the easements associated with the runway protection zones. So this is a close, whoa, we're going a little faster than I thought. So let me, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get that back to where it was. Sorry about that. I knew I was going to test myself here. Okay, so here is so this is a little bit of a zoomed in view at the 2-4 ends, and the EMA system as part of the runway safety area, some of the new taxiway, stubs and parallel taxiway. Again, the purple is the removed taxiway. So I can get caught up here. All right, and same thing, zooming over to the 15 ends, looking at the runway extension, some of the removed pavement, the runway protection zones, and again, the balanced extension also on the 3-3 ends. So that's just a brief overview of the different master plan projects that will be analyzed in detail as part of the environmental review process.
So that map that, we have a handout of the projects on the table. It's a small graphic, I understand that. We will be posting it on our website, on the environmental assessment page. On the airport's website, we'll give you those directions in a few moments. But you can zoom in on that one, so you'll be able to see kind of each project. It's a little bit easier to look digitally online than it is from the handout, so just so you know where.
And if you're really curious, you can read about each project and all the alternatives that were evaluated as part of the master plan process, and that is posted on the website. Okay. Is there a way to hide this at the top? No, probably not. Okay. So this is the environmental regulatory review process. This is an overview slide. Airports are required under federal law to evaluate the impacts of proposed airport improvements on the environment. So FAA has defined, and FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration, and please, if I use an acronym that I don't define first or I forget what it is, just please raise your hands and I will make sure to spell it out for you. So the FAA defines the categories that you need to evaluate as part of the review process. So the FAA works under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the terminology for their review documents is an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. Oops, I am clicking away here. The projects also trigger state review under what's called MEPA, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, as well as local review under the Cape Cod Regional Policy Plan. So we have multiple levels of review that all these projects will need to go through, and we'll need to make sure that we're documenting compliance with all the regulatory requirements. As part of this process, because we have these three similar but slightly different review processes, we're going to be seeking a joint filing. So there'll be one document that will address all three of these federal, state, and local review processes, and that'll simplify things for ease of review and for timing. So as part of the environmental review process, outreach is key. That's why we're here tonight. This is the first of several meetings. I'm going to turn it back over to Erin to discuss how we advertise, how we plan on advertising these meetings, et cetera.
Thanks, Alyssa. So it's been mentioned a couple times now, there is a project website. So it's https, what is it called? /flyiHYA.com/environmental-assessment. And I think we need the backslash, right?
So it's easy just to go to flyhya.com as well, and if you look under airport documents, you will see an item that says environmental assessment. You'll also see previously to that, the airport master plan. So any of the master plan documentation is still up on the website. Any technical reports or anything that we produce from this will also be on the website. And if you have problems, just email us, let us know, and we'll lead you right to the location.
Oh, duh. It's been a long day. It's a / I should know. And I believe that both the website and the email, we created a handout because we know Alyssa's going to say some acronyms that, she's going to forget. So we tried to include on that handout all the acronyms that will be helpful, and I believe the project email on the website is on there as well. So we did advertise in the Cape Cod Times. It ran on the 16th, the 19th, the 21st. It was online daily. We also advertised in the Barnstable Patriot. It ran on the 14th, and again, was online daily. We sent a press release to the local newspapers. We distributed a multilingual postcard within 5 miles of the airport. Hopefully many of you received that. And then we also, so MEPA, EJ stands for Environmental Justice. There's a screening form that MEPA requires to be sent out, so that was translated and distributed. And then the meeting notice was shared with the Cape Cod Commission, the Cape Cod Young Professionals, Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, public access TV stations. And then environmental justice is an actual, it's an actual term. So it's EJ populations are made up of significant amounts of non-English speakers, people of color, and low-income individuals. So the airport is in the yellow there, and then you can see we have the first. Oh, there we go. So that's the 1 mile radius. And MEPA standards have changed to you have to do outreach within a 5 mile radius. So that's why we sent a postcard to 5 miles. So it was 31,000 pieces of mail that went out to make sure that people knew about this process. So again, it's identified isolated language pockets. So that map identified pockets of Spanish and Portuguese. And we just distributed that MEPA EJ screening form. Again, the postcard. So, and then in addition to the distribution list, we also did the Cape International Language Academy, the New England Wellness Foundation, and the Cape Cod Community College, all to try to make sure that we're reaching those environmental justice populations. So we want you to be engaged in the process. There'll be public meetings ahead of the major milestones, and they'll be noticed in the newspaper. I think we asked for your email, so we'll create a stakeholder distribution list so we can email out the notice as well and, share away with friends, family, neighbors. Again, we've got the project website, the email. So all comments we're going to, direct to that project email so we can, have everything all in one place. And then you can subscribe to receive email updates. And that's it. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I was told to speak into the mic so everybody could hear me. So sorry if you couldn't hear my last discussion. For the project email, we did use a project email for the airport master plan. It was a great avenue for people to be able to reach out to us at any point in time. They could sit and have time with their questions or comments or think through what they wanted to ask the project team. And I think it was a good way for us to also develop a frequently asked questions, because there may be others in your neighborhood and in your community that has the same questions. So we'll be producing FAQs that will be posted on the website. So if you have the same questions as your neighbor, at least you can look through that FAQ. It's updated on a regular basis as we get more questions. But we'll be posting that to the website, so that will be available as well, so you can look through those anytime you need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Erin. All right. All right, so where are we on the environmental review timeline? We're at the very, very beginning of the process. Epsilon was brought on board, and we really got going kind of late summer. And so we're doing data collection. The master plan had an extensive amount of baseline information in it. But as we enter the regulatory review process, we know and anticipate what the different regulations and agencies will require. So we have continued on with that baseline data collection, and that's what we're working on right now. We're also here at that first public meeting. What comes next? Now we're going to start to get into putting together the information and submitting documents to the different regulatory agencies. And we'll be starting with the state MEPA process. with what's known as an environmental notification form, an ENF. And we are anticipating submitting this in late November. And this will get the process going at the state level. And this will provide some information, baseline information about the proposed projects. And that information will be used as a basis for what's called scoping sessions with the state to determine what additional information needs to be evaluated. After we submit the MIPA ENF, we'll start getting into, and that has been reviewed and is what's called a certificate issued. And I'll get into deeper details in a minute here. That's when we're going to start looking at preparing the larger combined document that's going to be documenting existing conditions, proposed conditions, the evaluation of the alternatives, and the evaluation of environmental impacts associated with the projects. And so that's going to be the one combined document that'll need to meet the regulatory requirements of 3 different agencies. And that won't occur until we'll get going once we finish the ENF process, but really that's going to be about a 9-month process to prepare that. So this is not a short, quick turnaround evaluation process. After we get through that, what's called a draft document, we get feedback. We'll have more public outreach meetings, and we'll start to prepare the final document so the final decisions can be made. And that we're now looking out towards the end of 2023 into early 2024. And then after all those agencies have had a chance to review and issue their either their review documents, they have different types of names, whether it's a decision or a certificate or a FONSI. I'll explain that one in a minute. Then we get into permitting. So permitting is still 2 years away for these projects. On the right-hand side, I've posted when the public has an opportunity to provide input in the regulatory process. So somewhere between, during the drafting of the draft documents, we'll hold additional public outreach. MIPA will also hold a scoping session that the public is invited to, and you can provide comments directly to MIPA at that time. Well, in between the draft and final documents, we'll also hold some additional public outreach meeting. The Cape Cod Commission will also hold public meetings at that time. And you'll also be able to submit public comments to, again, MIPA, FAA, and the Cape Cod Commission. That's what I just said. So during the entire process, in addition to just what's required through the agencies, we'll hold a total of 5 meetings, this being the first of the 5. And the subsequent meetings will discuss the different project components and our findings as part of the environmental analysis that we'll be doing. So as I mentioned, we're in the data collection and analysis process. So we began our site investigations last month. We're collecting additional information like topography. We're doing survey via drone. ASG is taking the lead on that. We're documenting the limits of the water bodies that are near the projects. We're looking at grading design. We're looking at limits of wetlands, et cetera. So we're doing cultural resource surveys. There's just a lot of different details that we need to collect. I wish this wasn't cut off. Okay. So I'm going to go through what the NEPA process entails. So the National Environmental Policy Act is NEPA with an N, N as in Nancy. The jurisdiction of NEPA is projects undertaken by a federal agency or requiring a license or permit, land transfer, or funding from a federal agency. So FAA is the federal agency that has both jurisdiction and is providing funding for these projects. NEPA requires review under federal law to evaluate the impacts of these proposed airport improvements on the environment. And the environmental impact analyses are broad to all the actions of FAA that are subject to FAA decision or funding. And again, we need to complete this process before any types of permits can be issued. So the document that gets submitted under NEPA is called an environmental assessment, or an EA. And the final decision on that document is called a finding of no significant impact, or a FONSI. I wanted to do a pop quiz on all these acronyms, but I was shot down. But hopefully you're learning something as part of this process. This is the world that I live in on a daily basis. So the content of an FAA environmental assessment is dictated by FAA. It has a purpose and need, a description of the proposed project, an evaluation of alternatives, documentation of the existing conditions, documentation of the environmental consequences of their proposed project, and then the findings, or that FONSI. And these are the categories of environmental impacts that, or aspects that we need to evaluate. So it's quite broad. You're looking at everything from air quality, farmlands, land use, historical and cultural resources, natural resources, socioeconomic impacts, and environmental justice, public health impacts, visual effects, any effects to water resources. We also have to consider the cumulative impact of all these different projects. And are there any irreversible or irretrievable commitment of resources? And what that really means is actually related to energy resources. It's just a long, complicated explanation for that. So for the state environmental review, MEPA, the jurisdiction is similar. It's projects undertaken by a state agency requiring a license or permit, land transfer, or funding from a state agency if they exceed certain thresholds that are established in the MEPA regulations. So in this case, funding will be provided by Mass DOT Aeronautics, which is a state agency. And again, the focus of MEPA is to review potential environmental impacts and analyses and of measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate damage to the environment. MEPA is very public, has a lot of public involvement. And the documents that are submitted for MEPA are environmental notification forms, or an ENF, a draft environmental impact report, and a final environmental impact report. At the conclusion of review of each of those documents, MEPA issues a certificate. So at the conclusion, after review of the ENF, MEPA will issue a certificate on the ENF that will detail the scope of information that they are looking for in the environmental impact report. So while we can anticipate what that information might entail, it's really MEPA that determines the contents in accordance with their regulations. So again, MEPA is not a permitting process. The thresholds that in their regulations that that gives MEPA jurisdiction over this process is the creation of 10 or more acres of impervious area, expansion of an existing runway at an airport, and construction of a new taxiway at an airport. MEPA has a very large focus on greenhouse gas emission analysis, climate change and resiliency, and environmental justice and public health impact analysis. Those last two bullet items were greatly expanded with new regulations at the beginning of this year. So MEPA really has broad scope. So the environmental review process at the state, it starts with, Erin mentioned this, an environmental justice screening form. So we have to submit this screening form to a designated list of parties given by MEPA, and this gets emailed out at least 45 days before you can file anything with MEPA. So that's been done, that's been sent out, and we're in the process of preparing the environmental notification form. When that is submitted, MEPA will hold a scoping meeting, which is an opportunity, and then there's opportunity for both written public comment and verbal public comment during the scoping meeting. And the scoping meeting may very well entail a site visit or just a virtual Zoom meeting. That'll be up to MEPA. MIPA will issue that certificate on the ENF, and we'll work on the draft environmental impact report according to the scope laid out by MIPA. Again, they'll have a public comment period associated with that. We'll receive another certificate, and then we'll get to the final environmental impact report, which hopefully has really narrowed down the scope of environmental analysis that it remains to be completed. And then finally, we get a certificate on the FEIR. The MIPA process and the Cape Cod Commission process can be done in parallel. And in fact, it can be preferable to do that because, again, there's a lot of the same information. So the Cape Cod Commission review is your local review process at the planning level here in Barnstable. The Cape Cod Commission is Barnstable County's regional planning and regulatory agency. It's authorized through the Cape Cod Commission Act. The Commission's responsible for balancing the protection of the region's resources. The Cape Cod Regional Policy Plan was amended in 2021, and it has requires the analysis to determine, a lot of big words here, comparative benefits and detriments of a project and its consistency with the policy plan and local comprehensive plans and goals. So the document that is submitted is called the Development of Regional Impact, or a DRI, and it looks at impacts on natural, built, and community systems. So different terminology, but really we're assessing very similar things that NEPA and MIPA ask us to do. So I gave it, here's an example of a goal that comes straight out of the regional policy plan. And so this is from a natural system goal and with the subcategory heading of water resources. So the defined goal is maintaining high quality drinking water. And the objective is to protect, preserve, and restore groundwater quality. So the analysis that we'll have to do in order to address this goal would be to evaluate how the projects would impact groundwater quality. So the next steps for environmental review, again, are submittal of that environmental notification form at the end of November, and having additional public outreach meetings and the MIPA scoping meeting. And again, there will be the ENF submittal will be posted on the project website. It'll be noticed in the state environmental monitor, and it'll also be noticed in the local newspaper that it's been submitted. So there'll be ample notification that it's been submitted, and then there's a defined public comment period in the regulations for folks to submit their comments. And then coming up, we'll get through the combined NEPA, MIPA, and Cape Cod Commission documents and get through permitting. So here are again, the project contacts, your website that will have all the technical documents that we're posting, as well as any presentations or handouts such as the one given out tonight. So if you know of anyone that couldn't make it tonight, you can direct them to the website. They'll have this presentation. It'll have the handout posted there as well. So with that, I'll turn it over for any public questions. Again, just a reminder of the guidelines that Erin gave out earlier, and we would ask that if you do need a Portuguese translation, please let us know. We do have a translator on Zoom on standby.
Any questions or comments?
On the preliminary preparation of this, how many people from that 5 mile restricted area were involved in the process?
So the question is, how many people in the 5 mile?
Something like that. How many representation of the immediate
Involved in the master plan process?
So we did the same process for the master plan, where we provided postcards and public comments were welcomed. The postcards for the master plan that went out were a 2-mile radius. They're meeting, under the environmental review, they're meeting the requirements of environmental justice, I believe, Erin, for the 5-mile radius. So for the master plan, it was voluntary for us to do that. So we sent postcards out requesting feedback and stakeholder input within a 2-mile radius, plus we hit all of the Barnstable Patriot, the Cape Cod Times, to make sure that the word got out about the master plan.
But how many people were involved directly with the design, with setting this up?
We probably had about 25 representatives of various stakeholder groups that were present during that process. We had some village associations that were part of that process. We had some state agencies, federal agencies, as well as different town participation from different entities. The master plan website identifies who those stakeholders were, and we're reaching out to those same stakeholders to be part of this process.
Hi, Christine Gradilli from West Yarmouth. I just had a couple of comments I want to tell you. One is, you did mention earlier this is Zooming, but I have to tell you, in the PR that sort of went out, there was nothing mentioned about the Zoom capacity, because I had questions asked of people, including, I got various handouts and things like that. Secondly, there was an error repeatedly, and I actually called the radio station finally, in which they were saying this meeting was at 7 tonight, not at 6. And they finally started correcting it at about 8:30 this morning. They took the time off of actually the discussion. It had been 7 up until then. And then finally, I would also make a suggestion that in the documents that you're showing us on the screen here, the size of the print, I've got corrected lenses and I'm sitting in the 3rd row, it's barely legible. And so I would like to see that if you're doing presentations future, that you use larger print, and it may mean that you may have to use several sheets for it instead. But it's very hard to read. It's almost impossible to read. And if you're not typing, writing fast enough of what you're physically, verbally saying, it's difficult. The other thing was that I would like, if it's possible, that in the future, if you had some kind of a summary sheet, I know you did a couple of summaries here, but the actual, some of the other dates, making sure that, all the timelines, I see some are on here, but just making sure that there's very good handouts. There may have been a couple of things that maybe could have been handouts from your presentation today. So that would be the only thing I would say in terms of public participation would make it easier. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. So regarding the Zoom, we mainly, as I mentioned at the beginning, we were only using Zoom for audio for Portuguese interpretation. Unfortunately, we're unable to get a Portuguese interpreter to come in person. Going forward for all other meetings, we're going to make sure that we can get an in-person, because our audio was not perfect with Nick, hence if you have a question in Portuguese, you have to type it. So the goal was to just have in-person, but we are recording and we'll post things on the website, because we know that not everyone can make an in-person meeting. So thank you very much, and we'll make sure we work on our handouts.
Yeah, because I think it'd be very important when you're noting websites and emails and things like that, to really have that really bolded out.
Yep.
That was one thing in the card that was mailed out. The front picture of it was very pretty, but when you went to actually read the print, I had some people say to me they needed to use a magnifying glass on the back in order to read the print because of the way it was printed on the back. So
Okay,
I think
thank you for that feedback.
Presentation, given population have a lot of needs. It isn't just the language, but it can be disability, visual, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Park. I live in Yarmouth Port. I noticed on one of the slides, noise was mentioned as one of the categories. And where I live, airport noise is an issue. And so will the noise component of this be built out in the master plan, or was that just kind of a bullet point, as in we need to just check this off to say that we looked at it? And if so, what kind of research is being done in order to be evaluated to integrate into the master plan?
Okay, so in order to respond to that, so the noise component would be evaluated in accordance what the different regulations require for the environmental assessment. So the master plan is complete, so we're looking at the projects that were recommended in the master plan. But yes, we will be doing the required FAA analysis on the preferred alternatives for the master plan projects. So that'll be documented in the different reports that are prepared.
Secondary question then. So if noise is going to increase with the implementation of the master plan, how will residents be notified of that so we can make comments and have our opinions heard about that, aside from coming to the 4 remaining public meetings?
Well, there'll be opportunity to review all the documents and to provide the public comments. All those documents will be put online. And then if you do have, if you want to make sure that you're on the email list, then that way we can make sure that you get notification of when everything is posted. And, if you have a particular concern, we can direct you to where in the documents that is addressed.
Good evening. Thank you for the session and the opportunity for comments. My name is Bob Rittenauer, Town Administrator for the Town of Yarmouth. And we were one of those agencies that Katie referred to that was invited to participate through the master planning process. And in that role, we conducted several public hearings, many of which were actively attended and participated by the airport team. And so I wanted to thank you for that, and we appreciated that very much. I had a couple of comments that I would make based on that. Obviously, working through our Board of Selectmen, we invited a lot of local residents who did come in and express all of the issues and concerns that they had. Obviously, noise, being one of the key items. Additionally, the town had hired an airport consultant that I thought through the master planning process worked closely with the town, and we also had some good meetings, I thought, with the airport team to develop what we viewed in the town as some collaborative strategies that could be used throughout the improvements at the airport to substantially address some of the local resident concerns, especially around some of the noise issues. And I would say, obviously, we're in a position so, folks know that the town, is prepared to make comments on the environmental assessment. But one of the things that I felt, based on the collaborative sort of process that we had begun to develop through the master planning process, one of the things that I would invite is to, maybe connect more formally at the data collection level with the Epsilon folks. And we're convinced that some of these collaborative strategies we could introduce that would actually be helpful for the airport to put its best foot forward to address sort of noise, increased concerns that local residents, we know they have, we've inventoried them, and we have some ideas on how that could be helped and mitigated. And it strikes me, we'd much rather be in a position to connect with you on some of the strategies and have it going up front, that maybe even in the environmental notification form, the initial things, that some of those strategies incorporated could go a long way towards easing the concerns of local residents. Obviously we know there's always going to be concerns anytime there's active neighbors, but what we'd like to do is try to participate as early in the process and not be reactive and wait until the scoping and come and and say that we need noise, because we all know I think some of the critical issues, and so we'd like to do that, and I invite that. And just secondly, I would speak on behalf of, if it's possible, to reconsider some of the remote participation abilities in the future. If you have the technology, it's not real hard. Just on a personal level, a lot of folks have called me. They said, "Well, are you going to attend this meeting?" And then they said they wanted to do it on Zoom and everything. I just said, "Well, listen, I'm going to attend and then I'll ask some questions and get the information. And, but folks have been asking, and, you know, some people won't come out,
Yes.
especially now, you know, but they'll zoom in, so if it's possible. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for being here. I appreciate that. We did, and thank you for what you had said. We did work with the town of Yarmouth's selectmen and the consultant that they hired to take a look at the master plan. That consultant did identify areas where we could do a deeper dive on the analysis of the projects that we were presenting in the master plan. And because we were a little bit more advanced in the master plan process, we took those comments from that consultant and we've embedded them in further analysis here in the environmental assessment. But Bob, I appreciate your comments and we'll work with the team to see how we can coordinate with you as we move forward through the entire process. Thank you. Any other questions? Yep.
Quick question. I live just to the northwest of 1533 in Barnstable.
Okay.
So looking, I mean, I love airplanes. I'm a plane nut. I grew up near Logan, so this is, for me, it's fun. But with the extension of 1533, you guys can already accommodate the E190s. Is the airport looking to accommodate larger planes, more of them, draw in another airline, something along the lines of what you see down the Vineyard and Nantucket? Are you guys looking to expand on the comings and goings and the airplane types, or is this just for safety and up to FAA standards kind of thing?
So when we started to look at the master plan, in the master plan at the runway extension, we looked at the old plans in 1990 that we identified an extension, a need for an extension. And then we started to look at the mix of our existing fleet of aircraft that we have. So we identified, and you can look, this is available in the master plan as well. We have a table that we've used to identify the existing fleet and the mix of runway lengths that that fleet would need today. And so we specifically did not want to just look at what JetBlue is doing and the aircraft that they might be transitioning to. They're included in the analysis, but we said we have a lot of corporate aircraft that already use this airport, so let's look at the family of aircraft that are using this facility and how can we better accommodate them. So the extension that we started to look at isn't if you build it, they will come. We're not seeking out any particular, yes, we're talking to airlines. We're always talking to airlines to see if they can provide a service here. But our runway extension is not hinged on getting a particular airline in here. We're not designing it for a particular airline. We're designing it for the family of aircraft that use this airport now.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, we live within a mile radius, and, you know, I feel like the elephant in the living room really is the noise issue and also jet fuel emissions. It's, you know, where we live, we literally have to stop conversation sometimes because we have so many jets coming right over our house. JetBlue is a big deal. Those are big jets. Big jets have a lot of emission and they make a lot of noise. So I think it's a very fair question to ask, where are we all going with this? I tried to lodge some complaints. You know, I went on this website that Fly HYA. My email bounced back. My calls were never answered. I'm just concerned about where is the power for the average homeowner here. The average homeowner isn't going to go on your website and read different studies, and I don't even know what environmental justice is. That's a new term. I care about, you know, health in general, groundwater, noise, you know, flight paths. What's going to happen 10, 20 years from now? And it seems like a lot of this, even the answers are sort of beating around this. Like I said, the elephant in the living room. A bigger airport is going to accommodate more planes. And what we're seeing now with the size of the jets coming in to Hyannis, an airport that probably 90% of Cape Cod doesn't even use, it's very concerning, very concerning.
So I understand your concerns. Noise is always a hot topic for any airport. Anyone that lives around an airport, noise is always a concern. Different people take noise in different ways, and it affects them in different ways, and I understand that. The airport itself has significantly reduced its number of operations over the years. We, at one point in time, were handling 200,000 aircraft coming into this airport in the 1990s, and we're down to 60,000 aircraft operating. So we have had corporate jets using this facility for quite some time. We've even had larger aircraft that were operating out of here as commercial service aircraft. So the footprint of the airport has really changed. The footprint of the noise signature of aircraft that are now being used today has changed. It's smaller, the footprint is smaller. As part of the airport master plan, we did do a noise analysis and a noise study. We identified what the potential proposed runway extension would look like with a noise signature. All of the noise contours that abide by federal regulations all remain on airport property. And when we did that analysis, we were very conservative to the fleet mix that we were using to analyze that. In regards to air quality, the team here from Epsilon will look at those air quality issues. And Alyssa, you'll be just aircraft and ground vehicles, correct? So they will look at that to see what is the air quality associated with the airport's operations. That's part of the analysis, so we will look at that. So you'll have a moment to take a look at that analysis as well. And the noise study, or the noise analysis, will also be looked at as part of the various reporting requirements from the federal, state, and local agencies. So we will be looking at that. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you're going to be comfortable with the noise. Unfortunately, we do live surrounding an airport. Many towns and communities have grown up around airports. Not to say that that doesn't mean that noise doesn't bother our community, because we know that it does. We do have a noise hotline where you can lodge complaints. I apologize if you didn't get your comments back, but please leave me with your information so I can make sure that you are responded to. But we will look at those elements as part of this overall analysis. I'm not going to tell you that noise is going to go away. We are in a transportation community here in Barnstable. We have multimodal systems here in Barnstable. This is the hub for transportation in this region. Noise isn't necessarily going to go away. We're going to abide by what we need to abide by according to the FAA's criteria. But the fact of the matter is, we all live next to an airport, and unfortunately, noise is associated sometimes with those aircraft that are taking off or landing at the facility. I will say that lots of strides have been made towards modifications to aircraft engines to make them quieter. We are also, as an industry, looking at electric aviation. One of the prominent airlines that operates here out of this airport is striving towards electric aviation. There are huge components that are associated with that are benefits for the community, whether that be a reduction in air, poor air quality, or a reduction in noise. Those have a lot of elements for us to really provide a benefit for air transportation to the public. And we're actively seeking those opportunities. In fact, right now we're applying for a grant to assist us with electric aircraft charging stations, so we can hopefully make that a reality in the future. But that is for your smaller aircraft. You're not going to see that in some of the larger corporate type aircraft that do utilize this field. We'll make strides where we can, and where it's possible within the industry, but I think you're still going to have to deal with, or you will be dealing with aircraft noise from the airport, because the airport will remain as an airport moving forward. So I know that probably doesn't give you a comfort level, but there are strides that have been made to improve that.
Just curious, how are you guys going to collect the data for air samples? How does that work?
So the analyses that we will be doing are what are called mesoscale analyses. We won't be collecting individual air quality samples. And I'm a wetland scientist by training, I'm not in, but we do have folks that are chemical engineers at Epsilon that will be examining the state monitoring locations and doing some comparisons with baseline data, and as well as looking at what are the anticipated emissions from the different fleet mixes, from the different modes of transportation being used at the airport, and even down to building emissions.
I've got a camper I set up in the summertime for our grandkids. It's white canvas. In 6 weeks, it's black as soot.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
One thing I've noticed over the years, if the aircraft go straight out the runway and continue, there's less noise. They don't have to put on as much power, they have time to climb, and they're not overpopulated area. But what I've seen, and what we've complained about, is planes coming in low over Barnstable Village, basically along Fenny's Lane, which is nowhere in line with the runway, and then turning down as they hit the highway, and turning in. We've called complaint. One of the answers we get most often is we have no control over that. They can go where they want. That doesn't give a warm, fuzzy feeling of a larger airport and an increased usage when you can't control what you have now.
So just to respond to that real quick, we do have what we call voluntary noise procedures that have approach departure patterns that we ask the pilots to follow on a regular basis. Not every pilot's going to follow that, because whether it's for, if they're the way that they're flying, they need to do some other type of maneuver when they're coming in. They are the pilot in command, so they can operate in a way that they deem that's safest for them. Not all pilots are operating on a flight plan coming to the airport. They may be talking to the air traffic control, but they're on their approach to the runway, and they're flying visually. So there are some differences that you will see in the traffic patterns for pilots coming into or out of the airport. No, we, the airport, and according to the FAA, cannot regulate that unless they're doing something that's unsafe. So when we have an aircraft and we are notified by the community that there's an aircraft that is flying low or what appears to be out of the flight pattern or flying not according to the voluntary flight rules, we ask them to notify us, because we can take a look at their traffic pattern. If we notice that their altitude is low, or we notice that they're flying out of parameters, we will contact those folks through our noise office. But no, it's not always going to happen. That's why they do call them voluntary flight procedures. We work very hard, especially with our tenants that are located at the airport, to follow those procedures, because they know that there's a community that lives here, and they are part of that community. We don't always get a positive reaction from everyone. With our tenants, yes, we have more flexibility, but when there's a transient pilot that's coming in from another airport that just is stopping over, we don't have that capability to demand that they fly those patterns.
The one that is primarily prevalent in the morning, at 6:15 to 6:18 in the morning, is one flight incoming, 2 planes, and it belongs to one of your tenants. Both of them.
Okay. Every morning around 6:15 to 6:18?
It's right in that time period in the morning, 6:15, 6:18, they're low, and they're coming right over the village.
We can take a look at that and see what we see over the past couple of weeks for a pattern. And then if it's noticed to be one of our tenants, we will reach out to them. But like I said, it is voluntary, so we do make sure that the pilots know of this. We've posted our friendly, fly quiet program at all of our fixed base operations where the pilots are usually navigating to, coming to the airport. We do outreach to make sure that the pilots are aware of this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will always follow that.
You mentioned 200,000 flights 10 years ago, whatever, and 60,000 now. What was the reason for the reduction, and might we again see 200,000 flights?
So back in the early 1990s, we saw the entrance of high-speed ferries. So the high-speed ferries were really the competition for our existing airlines that were here, and we started to see a downturn in operations overall with that competition. We also lost several of our airlines that were here on a regular basis. If you were to go just around the corner to the window that's located at Gate 1, you can see all the airlines that used to be at this airport. So we've lost some significant traffic. If you take a look at the Cape as a whole, you'll notice that residents that live in Mashpee and Falmouth area, they're going directly to Providence for their flights. They're not coming over to Hyannis to take their flights as they used to. More people have more opportunity going up to Boston. So we've seen a lot of shift in our number of operations. So I think a combination of things occurred: high-speed ferries, new opportunities at other airports nearby, that we started to see a shift in our operations.
Are you trying to get some of those airlines back?
We are. We are in active communications with many airlines. We have been over the years. Now is not necessarily a good time for like those smaller type of aircraft. There was a time when the airport was comfortable with a passenger seat that was 42 to 45 passenger aircraft. That's comfortable for this market. We have JetBlue that came in. They're 100 passenger aircraft. They come in on just on a seasonal basis. So, you know, this market year round, there's probably about 250,000 residents year round that utilize Providence or Boston for their flights. Because the availability for flights on a regular basis is just not here at this airport. So we'd like to offer that opportunity again. When we started to look at this through the master plan process, it's not something that we think is going to all of a sudden hit and we'll have, you know, 5 different airlines at the airport. We think it's going to be a gradual shift to, you know, people transitioning to using this airport on a regular basis. And it really comes down to how those airlines might be able to connect passengers to where they want to go. Florida, Atlanta, those are the high destinations. California from this region. Florida being number 1. There's about 5 cities that residents from this area normally go to, and we just can't provide that service right now to them.
Did you used to provide that?
We used to provide it with connections with different airlines, yes.
Okay.
There's
Someone talk about on the map, the easement fee acquisition area as to what type of easements, timeline, and what's the vision for the future with that?
Sure. So there are 2 different types of easements that the FAA typically wants an airport to obtain. Those easements are typically in the approaches of the runways to protect for that space. In other words, if we needed to do tree clearing, which we just did this last year, to just protect the approaches. We do have a number of easements that the airport already holds for most of our approaches, but not all areas are covered under the airport. So the FAA does suggest that we seek those easements when we can. Typically, unless it's not something that we would be buying the property, it would just be an navigation easement to allow the airport, if there are trees that were an obstruction into an approach, we would talk to the owners of those properties to be able to come in and modify that if we needed to.
As it's sort of known since the 1980s, I've been monitoring and concerned about this airport. And at the time back then, you know, the claims were being made by the airport that, well, you knew the airport was here, you know, you're the problem kind of thing. I guess what's very, very troubling at this point is this is an expansion of this airport. When you talk about easements, you are now intruding into the lives of residents and the quality of life of what goes on here. And as I told you, in the mid-1980s, I sat in a meeting with FAA officials in their offices up in Burlington, Mass. At that point in time, and they actually specifically stated that if this airport was to come to be asked to be create an airport on this land in this area, they would deny it. That they did not believe that in the kind of congestion and the kind of environment and everything that was here was actually an appropriate place for the airport. So I guess what's very, very troubling about all of this is that there's been this sort of incremental, encroachment that has continued on and on into the quality of the neighborhood lives around us. It's very interesting. There's someone around me just now mentioned as that airplane went out of here. That airplane leaving was far quieter than anything that passes over my house. And so I think that the quality of life and the residential quality and everything else is a major concern. I also think that there are safety hazards. I had a guest in my car I'm sitting out right here by the Staples Plaza when one of the airplanes was landing, and they screamed because they thought the airplane was going to land, was crashing into our car while we were sitting out there on the roadway. We know that there was the overrun that took place, as I call it, the St. Patrick's Day event years ago. We know there was a fatality, a plane crash in Lewis Bay and one just beyond Great Island out there. And I think that the quality of life, the safety, the other kinds of things, and when you hear about, indeed, I think the air pollution, the noise pollution, and everything is getting significant. And so, to tell you the truth, to hear that you are expanding basically into our residential neighborhoods now, as opposed to, we went and intruded on your airport. So the question of, does this airport and the size of this airport really need to be here, particularly when you're saying you're trying to attract new aircraft? And I mean, it's a message I've been giving for 4 decades now, almost 4 decades, and I think that it's a major, major concern. And I think that, people are getting to the point where we're kind of frustrated in terms of, can anything be stopped, or is it just simply going to be this large aviation, factory? And the fact that these aircraft cannot be controlled about where they fly over us, I mean, I watch them over the hospital, I watch them over all kinds of sites, is a great concern at this point. And the fact that they're going to be more or larger is incredibly important. So thank you.
So just wanted to comment on a couple of the points that you made, and thank you for your questions or your comments. I wasn't present for your conversations that you had with the folks in Burlington. I know that as part of this master plan process, we did have representatives from the FAA that included our environmental planner, from the FAA. We had our actual planner as well from the FAA and an engineer from the FAA that were present through the process for this master plan. They did ask a lot of questions about how we were going to proceed forward with a lot of these projects. One of the things that we started looking at from the very beginning of the master plan process was to reevaluate the old 1990 plan that identified the runway extension. And from my past life and past experience working for the state, for the aeronautics division as their environmental analyst, one of the things that I wanted to make sure is that when we started to look at that old plan, that we looked at making sure that the airport extension to meet the existing needs of our existing fleet could be done all on airport property. And we specifically went through probably about 20 to 30, I don't know the number really off the top of my head anymore, but about 20 to 30 different analyses of the runway extension. FAA actually even had us look at the opposite runway to see if there was a possibility that we could extend that runway. And my mantra and our mantra through the entire process was, we have communities that surround us. So whatever we're looking at, we want to make sure that we have a balanced approach to how this runway extension may proceed forward. Now, the environmental assessment will take a deeper dive into the runway extension. There'll be more overview and review by environmental agencies to look at that, but we specifically wanted to stay on airport for the very comments that you brought up. We know that we live in a community. We want to make sure that whatever we look at for future endeavors for this airport, it's not pie in the sky. It's to meet what our current need is. In regards to your comments about safety, if anything, airports and pilots are the safest group that can possibly be. We have checklist upon checklist upon checklist that we use. From an airport standpoint, we are evaluated every year from the FAA to make sure that we're meeting our safety standards. We're also evaluated from the TSA, Transportation Safety Administration, Security Administration, to make sure that we're meeting security standards. When we do a project, we go through quite an ordeal with the FAA from a safety standpoint to make sure that we have a construction and safety plan that makes sense and that all involved are safe while working on an airport. We have a team of people that conduct inspections throughout the day to make sure that they're inspecting for security breaches, they're inspecting for wildlife, they're inspecting the pavements to make sure that there's nothing on the pavement that a pilot is going to ingest in their engine. This is done on a regular basis every day. If there's a weird abnormality, weather, anything that changes our potential conditions on the airfield, we're checking the airfield. So there are multiple safety parameters that are implemented. Pilots themselves, they have to go through training, much more training than somebody driving a bus. The training that they go through is extensive. They have to have biannual reviews to make sure that they still know what they're doing. And if for some reason, God forbid, there's an accident, it's thoroughly investigated by the FAA or the NTSB, depending on the severity of the incident. We take security, we take safety very seriously. We have multiple checks that we look at for the pilots themselves as well as the airfield. If something happens, we document it and we learn from it. So we try to do our best to make sure we're safe. In regards to the concern about somebody coming in on approach and being very low and your friend screaming, yes, we are surrounded by a community here, and some of those approaches, it feels like the aircraft is going to land on your car. But those pilots are typically flying some type of instrument approach, and if they're not flying an instrument approach, they're using navigational aids that are on the ground here at the airport to help guide them into the proper position for landing on the runway. So there are a lot of checks and balances that we go above and beyond to make sure we're safe at the facility.
Just to follow up to my earlier point, first of all, thank you for this presentation. It's awesome. You're doing a fantastic job. It's very rigorous. I think we all understand that you're beholden to the FAA for a lot of the stuff that you're doing. What's missing for me in this presentation is kind of a community care component. Like, you hear us, we're talking about noise, we're talking about pollution in our homes and in our backyards and things like that. And I haven't seen anything in this presentation about we're partners with this community, and we track these 5 metrics that basically go, this is what the community said in our public meetings, this is what they care about. We can't control all of these things, but we track them. So we're able to report out. I mean, that's the basis of these questions that are, and that's why people are upset. It's kind of like, it's not helpful for us to hear, the FAA says this, or we don't have any control over it. What would be helpful for us is we're tracking what's important to you as a community part.
Okay.
And although we can't necessarily change all these things, we're aware of it and we're reporting out on it. And we don't see any kind of angle there. And so when I leave right now, I'm going to leave thinking, well, this is a very good, rigorous program. You've got a good research approach. You're doing it like every other city you work in. But I don't feel like there's any sense of care that the impact of this work is sensitive to the community. And now I know it is because you're doing these public forums, and so I respect that. And I know that behind the scenes, I'm sure you are very caring of that. But it didn't come through in the presentation.
Okay, that's a very good point. I appreciate you stating that. Let me get together with our team to see how we can do things a little bit better. Let me reach out as well to some of the folks that we've already spoke to at the town of Yarmouth and the town of Barnstable. See how they have accomplished this, where there's the stakeholders that we're asking to come to the table, how to go about proceeding forward with that. So let me do a little digging, and we're going to have to get back to you. Okay, thank you for your comment.
one more question, sorry, thanks so much. Roughly, in the word recommendations, the double M, there's a new, at that location, if it was on the map, there's new housing of about 250 plus units being built. They're in the process of being built now. Was that taken into consideration with these expansion plans?
Taken into consideration how? From a noise
Directly
standpoint
in line
or?
with the runway.
So when we started to look at the runway extension, one of the first things that we did is we looked at an unconstrained runway. So if we, let's just say we looked at the biggest runway we could possibly get. And then we shrunk it down to say, okay, what do we need to do to just accommodate our existing fleet, which is our intention, accommodating our existing fleet, and how do you shrink that in and still have the approach systems that you need in place, still have the clearances within the approach that you need? Can you realistically accommodate this size runway in this footprint? And that's what we did. So I can't answer you as to whether or not we looked at the residential units that might be beyond that point, but we looked at what we could physically do here and still protect for our approaches. And it ended up being this alternative that we looked at.
They're currently being built now, and I don't know if they were in design when you were doing your plan. But they're there, they're coming, and it's a safety factor.
Any other questions, comments? Yep.
Yeah, I was just curious, how soon till we see the electric planes?
So, thanks for that question. Speaking to the industry, there's a couple of companies that are proceeding forward with this. The word on the street is it's anywhere from 2024 to 2025. They need to get FAA approvals, certification approvals for the aircraft itself. So that might take a little bit longer. I think that the companies that want to see electric aviation are saying 2024, 2025, but it really hinges on whether or not they get the certifications that they need. So we're aiming for that. We're aiming to be ready for that time frame in terms of having hopefully infrastructure that's in place, just like a car plugging in to electrical outlet like a Tesla, we would have something similar here for aircraft. So we're planning for that. I think it's still a little bit in its infancy as to what all those pieces look like. Today, just before this meeting, I was on a 2-hour conference call covering that.
Are they
So.
using electric airplanes anywhere right now?
They have electric airplanes that are in test mode. They have a company that's up in Vermont that has an aircraft that they're using. The company's called Beta, B-E-T-A. They're using electric aircraft. We've been in conversations with them. There's another company named Archer that's looking at building a 4-passenger aircraft. The Beta aircraft is a 6-passenger, Bob? 6-passenger aircraft. And then there's others there's an Israeli company that Cape Air has been talking to that has a 9-passenger electric aircraft that they're working on. So there's different variations. I think you'll probably see electric aviation more prominently in the smaller aircraft fleet, such as 9 passengers and below. When you start looking at some of the corporate aircraft that are coming in here, the larger corporate aircraft that are coming here, you probably won't see that for quite some time. In fact, they'll probably switch to some other type of fuel.
Any idea what the decibel change is?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can find out if they've done noise studies on the signature of the aircraft, but I don't know. I would have to find out for you.
Just a quick question. You mentioned earlier flight pass charter something. Is there anywhere we can access that?
It's on our
data?
website. It's on our website right now.
It shows your different flight paths, and does it show how many flights per day go through each one? Or
So there's 2 pieces of information that you can get from our website. The first piece of information is that voluntary procedure. We have a map. In fact, I wish Bob was still here from Yarmouth. His consultant asked us to update that and to work with him on making changes, and we did, and it's been updated. It's on our website. There's also a link on our website that will take you to an actual live flight tracking program. You can question a particular aircraft. You can actually send us a formal request for a complaint through that website. It's delayed by, Matt, how many minutes? 10 minutes, it's delayed by 10 minutes for security reasons, but you can, if you knew a flight took off at 5 o'clock in the morning over your house, you can take a look at that flight tracking website, and you can identify what potential aircraft that could have been. Yeah. Linda?
Does the construction plans for the expansion of the runway have any effect at all on PFAS cleanup on the
So that's a good question. So for all of our projects going forward, we test the soils, or we will test the soils for PFAS to meet the criteria that DEP has set forth. So any of our construction projects, in fact, you were present for a meeting that we had last month about the rehabbing of runway 624. We have a line item in that construction that we are looking to make sure that any of the soils that are going to be removed are going to be tested for PFAS. That is across the board something common that all departments of Barnstable have to look at. And in fact, when we fill out our capital improvement plan, that's number one highlighted. Does the project have any potential effect with PFAS? So we do look at that. The airport itself has mitigated according to DEP standards for the 2 locations that were identified to have high levels of PFAS. We do have those mitigation sites, but as you know, PFAS will filtrate into the groundwater. So even though we've mitigated our sites, what that means is we put a cap on those sites so rainwater cannot filter through that soil and further push PFAS into the groundwater. So it's like putting a stopgap on those sites. However, PFAS is still in the groundwater, so you have to monitor it as it leaves that site for a length of time. For us, that could be 10, that could be 15 years. So DEP requires that we monitor our site that we mitigated for, plus anything downgrading going towards the Mahar Wells, for PFAS to see if the levels are reducing and coming down in size to make sure that our cap is doing what it's supposed to do. Any projects moving forward, we typically will have a line item in those projects under the construction documents that identifies soil sampling that will be required to make sure that the soils that we might be moving, do they have PFAS at levels that are of concern to Mass DEP and EPA.
Can you identify what your test sites are? We're obviously concerned because of the contamination at Mill Creek.
Yeah.
So are there test sites that are upstream of Mill Creek?
Yes, there are. And so sorry that not all of you were at a meeting that we had hosted a month ago. We actually only had 5 members from the community that showed up to that meeting. But we extensively went over where the airport is in response to PFAS. And we have taken hundreds upon hundreds of soil and water samples, both off airport, on airport, south of the airport, going towards the Mahar Wells. So we have taken a lot of samples, and there are other entities and other agencies that have taken samples beyond that. So where groundwater transitions for this airport, it goes right towards the Mahar Wells. We know that. We've been tracking that. We know where our PFAS has appeared beyond just the caps. We also have been able to fingerprint the PFAS that comes from firefighting foam. The FAA requires that we use one type of firefighting foam, and it happens to have PFAS in it. So we were able to fingerprint what is our known PFAS. DEP accepted that. They looked at the science behind it. And then we were able to fingerprint anything that wasn't ours. So there are other industrial sites north of the airport, off of airport property, that have PFAS in that's going towards the Mahar Wells. The wells themselves, Barnstable has responded to that already. They put a $9.1 million filtration system in that has a carbon-activated charcoal that collects the PFAS. They have a program in place so that they can change those filters out when they become exhausted, and they are monitoring that, and that's how they are protecting the drinking water wells there. Beyond going towards Bass Creek, there have been studies done that were not done by the airport, but studies done by others that indicate that the levels that are in Bass Creek are acceptable from a DEP standpoint as not being a safety hazard. or a health hazard, I should say. But in regards to how the airport is dealing with their PFAS, we've been very aggressive. We have made sure that our activities that had PFAS in it, such as firefighting, that annual testing that's required by the FAA is done differently now. We don't spray the foam on the ground. We have a unit that we connect to the truck so that none of that PFAS is getting out. The only opportunity that we would have a situation where firefighting foam would be used would be in an aircraft accident or a fire where it was necessary. Back in July of 2016, we had an aircraft that landed and came out to the parking lot here in the rental car parking lot. We did have to spray foam. All the foam went into a catch basin and it was collected immediately. We put caps on our catch basins and we had a remediation group come out and take all of that foam out of the catch basin. So it was a closed system and it didn't go to any health hazard, didn't go to any of the drinking water or wells next to the airport.
I think you should take an opportunity at this point to explain what's going to happen with 624 next year, because some of these people who are on 1533 really need to know that all aircraft traffic is going to be on 1533 next year.
Sure. So thank you for the question. So we have, and Bob, I might call you up here if I need assistance, but this runway right here, 624, is in need of rehabilitation. It's over 20 years old. It has some significant pavement cracks like you would see out on your roadway when you do crack sealing. We've done extensive amount of crack sealing on this runway to preserve it as much as we can, but it is due for rehabilitation. So when back in 2017, 2018, he's not listening to me. Back in 2017, we rehabilitated 1533, which meant that when we rehabilitated this runway, the only runway in use was 624. Now it's flipping, it's the opposite. So now that 1533 is rehabilitated, we are rehabilitating this runway and it's going to start next year, sometime in the March timeframe. When we rehabilitated runway 1533, we made sure that we included in that project the intersection of the runway so that we could reduce the amount of time that would be needed when we rehabilitate the opposite runway, this runway right here, 624. So we do have a time frame for the construction. We were asked at one point in time by the FAA and others, other state agencies and federal agencies to split the project. But if we split the project, that meant that we would have to have the project occur over 2 seasons, which means longer effects. We pushed to make sure that the project was in 1 season. We were able to get that project in 1 season. Right now, the time frame is probably mobilization in March of next year. And the project, probably punch list items and ability to open the runway up would be sometime September or October. It is going to be an impact to the communities that are living specifically southeast of the airport. Hyannis Park Civic Association will be affected by that. You know, it's something that we have to do just to make sure that the runway, we can have it for the next 20 years. I know it is going to be an impact. It's not going to be easy. And unfortunately, we don't have weather like Florida. So we need to do this type of construction during the nice time of year. In the summertime here on Cape Cod.
It'll also be Barnstable Village as far as, it's the 2 ends, both ends of the runway.
On the, on the up, so this is going to be closed, so you will have Barnstable Village, which will be affected, as well as the Hyannis Park Civic Association, just for the neighborhoods in general, just to give an idea of the effect. It's not ideal. It's not. I have to say, our engineering team is here with us tonight. They did a very good job on making sure that they could have a realistic schedule for the project. And in fact, we pushed, everyone probably has driven by what we call that EMAS bed. It looks like a helipad right next to Iona Road, where the old Mildred's restaurant used to be. That has exceeded its life. It needs to be rehabilitated. We need to redo that EMAS bed. We pushed the FAA to enable us to get both that project and 624 at the same time so we can shorten that construction window. And they agreed to it, which is very, I have to say, we're proud of ourselves that that happened, because it is very difficult to get discretionary dollars from the FAA for projects that are in this region when we're competing with other airports all through New England. And we were able to get that project in. It's a $25 million project total, Bob, for both?
Yeah, yes.
$25 million for both projects. Typically, our funding that we get from the FAA on an annual basis is $1 million. So we needed $24 million from them through discretionary to do this project. And we thought we were going to have to split it. They allowed us to do it together, which shortens that construction window. You're welcome. Okay. I think we're going to wrap up for the evening. Please do take a look at the website. Not everything is going to be posted tonight. We will post the presentation will be posted on the environmental assessment page. If we have questions that come from the community, please utilize that email address for your questions, and as we get enough questions, we will start posting an FAQ page about the project, and anything else will be posted there, as well as our schedule for meetings. Thank you.